Every person has a story, and every experience has a lesson. This is Limitless Minds, where we talk to our Cal alumni, be it scientists, artists, educators, professionals, and much more, and all to uncover the pivotal moment that shaped their lives. I'm Tanish Shenoy, your host, and together we'll be exploring their triumphs, challenges, and defining experiences. Let's get started. Hi, I'm Tanish Shenoy, and welcome to Limitless Minds. Today's guest is someone whose list of titles reads like a history book. She's served as the governor of Arizona, led the entire Department of Homeland Security as its first female secretary, and later she became the president of the University of California system. But beyond our resumes and recognition is a woman who started off in a Girl Scouts with a fierce curiosity and hand always raised. Today, we get to meet the person behind those milestones, the thinker, the doer, and the girl who wouldn't stop asking questions. That person is none other than Secretary Janet Napolitano. Janet, welcome to Limitless Minds. I am so honored to have you here and very excited for today's conversation.
Well, thank you. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you. So before we dive into everything you've done, I want to start off with something small, something early. Sometimes it's those childhood moments that explain everything and shape us into who we are. I remember you once said that you were that kid in Girl Scouts who always raised her hand. That one detail, I have to say, it really stuck with me. It says a lot about drive, curiosity, maybe even a little bit of resilience. So when you think back to that little girl in New Mexico who's very curious, bold, maybe a little bit relentless, do you still see her in today and who you are today?
Well, that's an interesting question. You know, Girl Scouts was very important to my growing up. I was active in Girl Scouts all the way through high school. I was a camp counselor all the way through college. I know lots of corny camp songs, let me tell you. But one thing that I took away from Girl Scouts, and I don't know where it came from, but there was always, who wants to arrange the flag ceremony? Who wants to help plan the camping trip? Who wants to set up the booth at the Girl Scout fair? And I would always raise my hand. And I learned lessons from that. I learned that when you raise your hand and exercise that initiative, that people will come along and follow. I learned that if I raised my hand, I could get a lot of valuable experience, even if it was on something that in retrospect looks small, but it was a learning opportunity. So I owe a lot to the Scouts.
Wow, that's something that really resonates with me. And I know so many people who've had those similar experiences that, shape their confidence and their leadership. But shifting gears a little bit, at UC Berkeley, where I'm currently a sophomore, I've noticed that something has been on my mind a lot. And I mean like a lot. I see so many incredibly talented students who are capable of achieving a lot and have everything it takes to succeed. But still, they hesitate. They hold themselves back. And no, it's not because they lack the ability or anything. It's because deep inside, they're wrestling with this question over and over again. The question is, do I really belong here? Or am I good enough? And I'll just say this, I'm not immune to that voice either. Even with my own experiences, leading teams, building startups, that doubt, it still creeps in to me. It also makes me wonder if the best of the best and the most confident people among us feel this way, how many others are actually quietly struggling with it too?
Well, imposter syndrome I think it affects everybody at some point or another. And I think the key thing is to say, not that I don't deserve to be here, but how do I deserve to be here? And what can I do to make the most of the opportunity that I have here? And to recognize if you look around the classroom or you look around the office or whatever, that others are feeling the same thing. So if everybody's feeling the same thing, everybody can't be an imposter. I mean, you all went through the same admissions process. So what the heck? Just say, you know what, you deserve to be here, but keep moving on.
Okay, so got it. So it's all about just keeping at it and owning the fact that you actually belong here. But I'm curious though, how do you really feel that, like, how do you move on from doubting yourself to genuinely believing, okay, I deserve to be here, I belong here? And then there's the other side of it. Sometimes people don't just wonder if they belong, but ask, why am I here? Or what's my purpose here? How do you think about that?
Well,
How
why
would
am
you?
I here is a different question, right?
Yeah.
And that part of that is just the experience of education. When you come to a university like Berkeley, you come out of high school, you may have come, as I did, out of just a big average public high school in Albuquerque, New Mexico, or you may have had a very elite private high school education. But high school ain't college, and it certainly isn't Berkeley. And so part of it is just the adjustment to the new environment in which you are, and then recognizing that, if you really, go through the catalog and try some new things, there will be things to learn about and to experience that you simply weren't exposed to in high school. One of the things I caution students is not to have their whole education plan set from the day they show up. Like, I'm going to major in this, and then I'm going to go to this graduate school. I'm going to do this, because things happen and life tends to take different paths as you go along it. So don't get too wedded to one rigid idea from day one, because you're not ready to be wed. You don't know enough to be wed.
Okay, wow, that makes so much sense. So, college is more than just your classes. It's about adapting to a new environment and actually discovering yourself. It's not about having everything figured out from the start. Sure, you might know what major interests you, or you might just have some vague idea, but you don't need to have that perfect roadmap to graduate school or maybe even to your dream job one day. Would you say that's right?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And, when I started college, I went to Santa Clara University, which is a Jesuit university down on the peninsula. And I thought I would be a music major because I really like music. I played the clarinet through high school, both in the symphony, the orchestra, etc. And after about 3 weeks, I figured out two things. One is I was tired of practicing, and two was I figured out I was not going to be first chair clarinet in the New York Philharmonic. And in the meantime, I was taking classes in international relations. I was taking classes in economics. I was taking classes in art history and history in general. And these were the kinds of classes I really had never been exposed to. And I found my interests lie elsewhere. And when you're 17 or 18 or 19, however old you are when you start, that is the freedom that you want to exercise.
Wow, that pearls of wisdom really hits hard for me, who's just 19, just like completed off just my freshman year at Cal, and so now just trying to figure out what to do next. So I know you've also led at the highest levels, like be it the universities, states, national security, and I want to talk a little bit more about that. Did you ever feel that moment of doubt, that quiet doubt, that even when the resume said you belonged, even when you knew you belonged, you still felt that, oh, how am I going to be able to do it? Or, oh, I'm not able to do it. And how did you move forward without letting it get the better of you?
Yeah, well, my first job in public service was as the U.S. Attorney for the District of Arizona. Now, what's a U.S. Attorney? A U.S. Attorney is appointed by the president, confirmed by the Senate, and you're the chief lawyer in a federal district, and it's basically a federal prosecution job. So you take the lead of the office as the appointee, and then working for you I had like 120 what are called assistant U.S. attorneys. These are career prosecutors. And when I walked into that door, I had never actually handled a criminal case. I had been in a law firm for 10 years. I'd handled lots of complex corporate litigation, but I hadn't handled a criminal case. And there was a moment when I walked into that door where I was like, oh my God, they're going to realize I don't know anything. But I took my time. I appointed a really good chief of staff who was a career prosecutor. I took on some cases myself, and I learned, my learning curve was vertical. So I guess if I have to share anything, it's, when you must, you can, and never let them see you sweat. Just keep moving.
I see. So do whatever you can, learn as much as possible. And
If you must do it, you can't do it. Never let them see you sweat. If you have, yeah.
Good point.
Because when you're the leader, when you're the head, people look to you for your overall vision. They look to you for your sense of confidence, and they look to you for credibility. So you've got to establish all those things.
I see, yeah. And yeah, that's something that really hits home to me as I'm a teen entrepreneur myself who's currently building an ed tech startup. And one thing I have to confess, it is AI is kind of my first love. Sure, I'm still waiting on a girlfriend, but ChatGPT, it's been low-key so loyal so far. We've seen these things with tools like ChatGPT be able to write those legal memos, pitch decks, even code up a lot of good apps. I know it sounds wild, and I know you said that AI won't cause a massive job wipeout, but seeing how tech is moving so rapidly, does the traditional 4-year college model still hold up, or are we overdue for something else?
That's a really good question. And underlying your question is another one, which is to what extent does the evolution of AI affect the standard 4-year kind of bachelor's degree pattern? And I don't have an answer for that as we speak today. I will say that the 4 years, it's about getting educated, acquiring skills, acquiring knowledge, and the like. But it's also a period in life for maturation, for making friends, for learning how to live on your own. There's a lot that happens in a young person's life in those 4 years. And so I think for those who have the ability to be in college for 4 years and to really have the college experience, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Now, can you master the curriculum quicker because of AI? Or will the curriculum change because of AI or the requirements change because of AI? That I can't tell you.
I see. Yeah, that's an angle that most people I don't always see talking about, being like, sure, the traditional 4-year is actually still good. And I actually love that idea about that. But let's pivot for a second. There's this phrase we always hear, and something I always keep saying, which is follow your passion. But whenever I look at your career, whether it be law, public service, education, it seems more like a Swiss Army knife than your straight line. Did you genuinely follow your passion, or is that advice of following your passion just overrated now?
Yeah, you're here to follow your passion, which is good, because whatever it is you're doing, you want to find interesting and find it an area where you think you can contribute. But people have passions about lots of things. And so, I actually think it's not so much follow your passion, but it's follow your interests and be willing to take risks and take opportunities where they avail themselves, because you just don't know. I mean, you just don't know what's going to be 5 years from now, 10 years from now, et cetera. You want to be ready. And you want to be prepared to jump into another field if the opportunity presents itself.
See, yeah, that is so refreshing to hear and say it out loud. Secretary Janet, I know you also worked alongside President Obama, and I have to say that one of his quotes has always stuck with me. The quote being, the best way to not feel hopeless is to get up and actually do something. I know you lived that, be it through DACA, through expanding access to education. I know you gave people more than hope. You gave them action, you gave them structure, and you gave them real protection and opportunities. But one thing I've got to be honest about is today, that kind of hope alone doesn't always like land the same. I know like in my classes, I see a lot of my classmates and students, be it like first gen, dreamers, or just your everyday undergrads, quietly drowning in moments of uncertainty. They're like being like, oh, I don't know what's next week gonna look like. Some of them even are thinking, I don't know what the next few hours will bring. So, what should they tell themselves when the future is very uncertain, the system feels slow, and hope alone, it isn't holding them up?
Yeah, well, hope alone is not enough. It's a combination of things. It's in a way, it's appreciating the moment that you're in. In a way, it's creating expectations for yourself in a way. There's a lot of introspection that happens, particularly amongst college students, and that's really healthy. But what's not healthy is when introspection suffocates or overwhelms the appreciation of what it is you're doing, why you're here, and the opportunities that present themselves here with these years in your lives and with the experiences that you're having.
So basically, it's about owning your moment, showing up, soaking it all in, and chasing the opportunities that are present right in front of you instead of freaking out about the future or getting stuck in the, "Oh, I have no idea what's next" spiral. It's about ditching that fear altogether and just going for it. Did I get that part right?
Living in fear is like the worst thing because what you live in fear and all of a sudden you're withdrawing in your shell and you're not experimenting with new things, getting out, it's you become very introverted. And so quashing fear is a very healthy thing to do.
Yeah, definitely. Like, I remember as someone like me who's worked on startups a lot and stuff, especially during high school, I remember I had the fear of failure a lot. And it was one of the things that kind of held me back initially. But then now I have to say is that I'm not too scared of like going out there and stuff. But how would you give the advice to anyone who's in college right now, being like, oh, I'm afraid to try something new? Just say if they want to try like a new minor or something, or if they want to try a new club, or if they're like, well, I don't know how to say this and stuff, how would you give them the advice?
If you Well, look, part of this goes back to what I mentioned earlier, which is the willingness to take risks and to always think of, yeah, I want to try this new class or this new field, and then also evaluate, well, what happens if I don't try it? Well, then you don't learn about it, you don't know about it, you don't find out whether you're interested in it. Always evaluating that if you don't do something, there's a cost to that too. And maybe that's one way to proceed. I remember when I was the U.S. Attorney in Arizona and I was 39, I was turning 40, and the Attorney Generalship of Arizona was going to be an open seat. And that's an elected statewide position. Now, I was a Democrat. I am a Democrat. And Arizona was very red at that time in its history. But I thought to myself, I don't want to be 80 years old on my rocking chair doing woulda, coulda, shoulda. So I resigned as U.S. Attorney in order to run. But part of my calculus was, well, what's the worst thing that happens? The worst thing that happens is I lose. And if I lose, well, then what happens? Well, then probably I go back to my law firm. I have an interesting caseload. I do well financially, etc. That's not such a heavy cost in order to pursue something that was an itch I desperately needed to scratch. So I decided to run. So always looking at the what if. What if I do it? What do I lose if I don't do it?
I see. That's a really good perspective. I really appreciate that honesty. I know, like, with leadership and all, like, it's not just about strategy, it's like about the weight of the decisions and stuff. And how you were saying that, oh, you end up leaving and deciding, you know what, I'm not going to be like, oh, I could have done this, I could have done that. So I know you've made a bunch of decisions that have also affected millions across the US. And as someone who works in my startup, I worry about the next product release for my next startup. For you, I know you had to think about the national security that impacts millions. So I was wondering, how do you carry that weight, knowing that if you make one wrong decision, it's not going to be a misstep? It could mean some serious consequences.
Yeah, well, many people, particularly in the national security arena, bear that responsibility. And it's a heavy responsibility. All you can do is have a process that enables you to make the best decisions you can. You make those decisions. If your decision was an error, then have the ability to quickly recalculate, redo it. And yeah, and also have the courage to apologize. If you've done something that in retrospect was a mistake, was kind of dumb, it didn't seem it at the time, but it turned out it was, acknowledge it and just say, and this is what we're going to do to correct it. This is the change we're going to make, and keep moving forward.
I see. Yeah, that's definitely a lot of stuff you have to think about. And I'm wondering, like, it seems like you're the no nonsense type of person who gets straight to the point and just to get everything right all in one go. Are there any times where you felt like, oh, I'm not doing this right, or oh, this is actually something heavy? And how did you pivot or decide how to make the right decision?
Well, That's a really hard question to answer because when you're in a leadership role, that's what your job is to make decisions. And the easy decisions don't end up on your desk, right? The easy decisions, the easy things get worked out below your level, below being governor, below being a secretary, below being president. So by the time issues come to your desk, they're pretty tough. One of the things that I learned early on and had a lot of experience with is most decisions are not binary. They're not black or white. They're not yes or no. There are arguments on both sides, and there's a big area, gray area in the middle, and you've got to kind of work your way through those to make a decision that you think is the best decision available and that a decision that you're comfortable with. But reducing everything to yes or no or black or white or what have you, it doesn't reflect the complexity of most decisions that leaders have to make.
Yeah, I get it. It sounds kind of like making those decisions. It isn't about having a simple yes or no answer. You really need to be like more intentional and thoughtful by weighing all the possible outcomes more carefully. This could be irrespective of whether you're crafting a policy, launching a startup product, or even like rolling out some new security measures or university rules. These are like some huge decisions that often comes with huge consequences. And I want to say thank you for sharing such valuable insights. I know it sounds kind of wild to think about like how much of these wisdoms only come from lived experiences, like something that not even an MBA or PhD program can fully teach these. And another good thing about it is that once you learn these lessons firsthand, they really will be the lessons that stick for life. So I'm wondering, what's one thing about leadership you learned like the hard way? Something that no one taught you, but you wish they had taught you beforehand.
There's so many lessons learned because so many mistakes made that I learned from. What I wish someone had taught me early on was the fact that perfection was unattainable. I wasn't on decisions are made by human beings and decision makers are not 100%. It's unrealistic expectation. If that's your expectation of yourself, you're going to end up being frustrated. You're going to end up being angry. You're not going to be a happy camper. But the willingness to set aside ego and to acknowledge that I can screw up, I can make mistakes, and that every human being does, and it doesn't mean I'm a bad person or a bad leader or anything else like that. It's just a mistake. And then, like I keep harping on, keep moving forward.
I see. Yeah, this is definitely something a lot of people, especially in my generation, a lot of youngsters struggle with. They're like, if I fail, I suck, or if I fail, I'm bad and stuff. That's definitely a good insight. And that also like reminds people that not everything has to be perfect and that perfection is pretty much overrated at this point. It just has to work out well, even if it does not turn out to be perfect, right?
That's right. And by the way, one person's perfection may be another person's disaster. You may decide, I want to do X. This is what we're going to do X. But there are people who think X is genuinely a bad idea. But you move forward on X, you achieve X, it's going well, it's implemented. But the folks who didn't like that idea to begin with, that's not their perfection, that's your perfection. I guess what I'm saying is, look, nobody is perfect, and learning how to handle that as an individual and learning how to acknowledge that you're not perfect, but it doesn't mean you're incompetent, that you're bad, or any of that those other things. It means that you're human.
That's such a good insight that being like someone else's like disaster is your like perfection or your like actual goal.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a really deep insight. And speaking of going deep, let's go a little bit deeper for a moment, like into failure. I know a quote which is, "What doesn't kill you makes you stronger."
Yeah.
And you know what? I honestly feel like it's sometimes just knocks you down in a way. Like last month, I was working on my startup, and when I was doing a demo, like my startup like platform it crashed, and at that moment I was just like so sad. I just wanted to disappear in that moment. But one thing is that I learned more in that disaster moment than any week of success. So I'm wondering, like, what's a moment like that for you, like a misstep or breakdown that has taught you something that nothing else could have thought you easily.
Well, in my family, we used to have a line that we used a lot, which is, life's hard, wear a helmet. And that's been good guidance for me. I keep reminding myself of that line all the time. One time, uh, in the aftermath of an attempted aircraft bombing on Christmas Day of 2009, I was asked to go on the press and talk about what had happened, how it happened, what we were doing to correct it, and so forth. And it was like 4 o'clock, and I was on the West Coast. It was like 4 o'clock in the morning to hit the early morning shows on the East Coast, and I just spoke inaccurately. I just screwed it up. And politics being politics, immediately folks from the other party jumped on me. A couple called me to resign. One said I should be impeached. And I was like, look, I misspoke. Like you haven't ever misspoken, but they hit me pretty hard. And so I said, well, you know what? I dug a hole for myself. I got to get myself out of this hole. And so I put together a little personal plan. I went to see some key members of Congress, both parties, that I needed to explain what I'd said and the mistake I made and apologize for it. I need to explain to the White House what had happened and acknowledge that I had screwed up. I talked to the press, both on the record and off the record, to explain it. And so, what could have been a career-ending gaffe, actually, in the end, turned out that within a week or two, things had moved on, and I had.
Beyond all the titles and success, I know that you've also been a real trailblazer, like, first woman in so many places. And I've been wondering, did being a woman ever give you that advantage, or did it sometimes present extra challenges?
Well, I was fortunate to be first woman in a lot of roles, and that was, I think, a function of history as much as anything else. It's where the evolution of women in leadership positions led in the late 90s and the 2000s. And so I had a woman whose shoulders I stood upon, who had paved the way, and then it was good timing. Now, it does turn out that in law enforcement, like in prosecution jobs, or in national security, like DHS, those are still very, very male and remain so. And so I would often find myself in a meeting where I was chairing the meeting, where everybody around the table was a male. And what I decided for myself was, okay, they're all guys, but I'm actually in charge of the meeting. So, I got to run this thing. And that's how I conducted myself. And for me personally, it's actually worked out pretty well. Other people have different styles, different ways of handling it, but that was for me the best way to go.
Wow, that's a really good way. And that really lands great insights. And wow, I'm kind of speechless in that sense of how you managed to like really be focused and all. Because people forget leading, it isn't about just big wins. It's about carrying the weight even when no one's watching. Now let's move on to the next part. I know there's a myth that strong leaders, they don't flinch, but I've found the real ones just somehow manage to hide it better. And you strike me as someone who's somehow always in control, who holds the room accountable, even when there's so much of pressure. But when the cameras are off and your calendar is cleared and it's just you, what are the thoughts that somehow sneak in?
Well, look, I have a little bit of an Italian temper, and occasionally I will go in my office and shut the door and, I'll just lose it. I'm pissed off and whatever. But the key thing is never take that out on your staff, never blame your staff, get it out, get it over with in private, and then, keep on with your work. But if I didn't allow myself to have those private venting moments, that pressure I think, would just build up in me. It would just keep accumulating. And that's not healthy either. People have different ways in which they vent or express, frustration. And that just happens to be mine.
Yeah, that's a lot. Definitely. Like a lot of times we're like, oh, we're so mad from each other. We're like so tensed that we definitely need a break. And it's so true that we should not be just putting it out on someone else and just instead, if a time comes up where it's like, oh, I'm really just not able to think something through, step away for a moment and actually come back. Really good insights about like being able to do it on your own and stuff.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah.
So now let's flip the question for a moment here. So let's start off with some context. I'm 19 and I'm a student here at UC Berkeley, part of Gen Z. And one thing for sure is that I know I'm not alone and that there are thousands of us leading clubs and colleges, launching startups and pushing ourselves to the limit, maybe even beyond our limits and figuring things out faster, or at least trying to figure it out faster. One thing I keep hearing about this narrative is that Gen Z, we aren't ready, we're not the best hires, or that we lack certain skills or work ethic. And honestly, I don't see that in myself or the people around me. So I'm wondering, what's your perspective on Gen Z?
Yeah. Well, my first perspective is I don't like this business of labeling, Gen X, Gen Z, what have you, because it becomes a way to stereotype. There are lots, thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of young people who are Gen Z, and they're all different. They all bring their different backgrounds, they bring their different interests, they bring their different talents and skills. And so I think characterizing Gen Z is kind of lazy in a way because it doesn't account for the fact that we're talking about individuals.
I see. So it's like saying you're talking about a whole group instead of individuals, like, and just because of a few people not being the best, you're like, oh, Gen Z is not the best. We're not having good hires with Gen Z. So I'm wondering, what do you wish people truly understand about Gen Z, like whether it be our strengths, our challenges, or even how we can grow into the leaders that the world actually needs in today's age?
Well, I think it's important to have some understanding of the era in which people grew up, right? Because it will affect their perceptions, their interactions with society, and so forth. And the so called Gen Z era, there's been a lot of stuff that's happened. It's, 911, it's the financial crisis in 2008, it's the election of Barack Obama, and then the election of Donald Trump, it's the Russian invasion of Ukraine, it's Israel, Gaza, it's all the changes in technology that have occurred. And, one of the differences I appreciate is, in my generation, I'm a baby boomer, right? So I was born toward the end of the baby boom generation, and we didn't really have technology. I remember when I was growing up, we had a black and white TV, and you had to turn the channel by yourself. And oh, by the way, there were 3 networks, 3 channels, and PBS. So that was your selection. But we didn't have smartphones. We didn't even have pagers, really. I mean, and so, when you had to write a paper, you wrote a paper or you typed it on a typewriter. I took Fortran, and we had to do our computer programs with punch cards, and we would walk around with stacks of punch cards. So, I mean, technology was just whatever. We certainly didn't grow up with screens. You all have grown up. Screens are part of you. You've used them since you were 2 years old. They come intuitively to you, how to use them, how to manipulate them, what's available to you. And so it's part of you. Whereas for me and for my generation, a screen is something that gets in between what I'm trying to get done. It's just a different view of technology. And that transition is something that really differentiates, I think, between boomers and succeeding generations.
Wow, that's a lot. And definitely like the part about like the boomers and like Gen Z is like boomers been like technology being like, oh, getting in the way of what we have to do. But Gen Z, we're like, we do not know a world without technology. We
Yeah,
grew up with,
so boomers will use technology, right? But it's not intuitive. It's not something that was planted in our neural networks when we were small children. It's something that we've had to learn about and master in our 30s, our 40s, or 50s. And so that's a different dynamic.
yeah, it's definitely a lot of dynamics based on like when someone grew up versus like being very different, like 50 years, like in the 1950s compared to like in the 2000s. It's definitely a huge difference. I know like a lot of people say like just because like Gen Z is a little bit technological savvy or oh, just because they have so much of technology and access that they're kind of lazy, but I don't always see that to be either the case. But one thing I know for sure is that just because someone might have an advantage or might have seemed like, oh, they had it better off, or oh, they grew up with something that for us it doesn't seem intuitive, for example. It doesn't mean that they're not going to be successful. In fact, anyone can be successful irrespective of what generation they grew up in, irrespective of when they were born, how they grew up and stuff. It all comes down to, I believe, like the attitude, the perseverance, and being committed to what you're doing. And speaking of which, I saved one last question that might ruffle feathers. So when you look at my generation scrolling fast, we're working hard, we're constantly hustling and grinding nonstop. What are we getting completely wrong about success that you wish many of us knew? And if you could grab the mic and say, Gen Z, stop doing it, what would that thing be?
I would say not Gen Z stop doing this, but I would say, Gen Z, have confidence in yourselves. You're smart. You're energetic. You're the future. I mean, you all are what gives people like me hope and hope for the future. So I would say just buck up, have some confidence, and go for it.
Lovely. That's so good. Like instead of saying, oh, stop doing this, just being confident. Love that insight. Definitely a lot of Gen Z needs to be hearing this. And now, well, we're on to we've talked about big ideas. We've talked about so many bold moves. We talked about a lot of amazing things in our conversation today and like many defining moments. But now let's have a little bit of fun here. I'm going to throw a bunch of quick questions your way. Answer via your gut instinct, first thought, and if you don't know the answer, just say pass. There's no pressure.
This is like a lightning round.
Yeah, this is a lightning round. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, sounds good. All right, so what were you wearing in that iconic Girl Scout moment?
What was I wearing? If you had, I had my uniform, my badge sash, and all my pins. I was really cute.
All right. Who's a mentor that deeply impacted you?
The judge I clerked for, Judge Mary Schroeder on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit.
Okay, cool. What's a decision you're glad you made, even despite it being risky?
I was glad I made the decision to leave private practice to go into public service. I was glad I made the decision to actually run for office. I was glad to leave elected office to join the cabinet. And I was really glad to leave the cabinet to become UC president.
Okay, wow, that's a lot. All right. What's a hobby no one would guess you enjoy?
I play the guitar.
Okay, all right. So, how do you unwind after a really busy day?
After a really busy day, I go home, have a little dinner, maybe watch a little TV. I like to read, and reading a good book is a really good way to unwind for me.
Okay, all right. What's your favorite book?
I have no one favorite book. From when I was a child growing up, I was a huge library user, and I always have a fiction and a nonfiction book going at the same time.
All right, okay. What's something people often assume about you that's totally wrong?
People sometimes assume that I can be a little stiff and intimidating. I just think, I actually think, I think I can be pretty funny, and I'm just a person like you.
Right? That's really cool, and definitely a lot of people need to hear that. All right. What's a song that always lifts your mood?
A song, so many, but it's Too Darn Hot by Cole Porter.
Okay. All right. What's one thing about college students today that actually gives you hope?
Intelligence, energy, and their genuine interest in making the world, not just the United States, but the world, a better place.
All right. Okay. If your life was a movie or a film, what would the title be?
JNAP. That's what a lot of people called me, JNAP. JNAP, a story in many acts.
All right. That's pretty interesting. What's your most used emoji?
Just a happy face. I'm a pretty basic emoji user.
All right. Yeah, basic as well. All right. Besides Berkeley, what's your favorite UC campus to visit?
Oh, I am not going there. I am not going to express a favor. I like them all. They're all different and beautiful in their own ways.
All right, cool. How do the students at Cal surprise you?
One of the things that really surprises me about the students at Cal is there's this stereotype that Berkeley is ultra liberal and the students are all ultra liberal. That kind of thing is a holdover from the 60s. We're a long way from the 60s, and the students are much more diverse in every conceivable way. And that's one of the great things about Berkeley. Yeah, it means that we ought to bury that stereotype.
I see. All right. What's your go-to comfort food after a long day?
Go-to comfort food after a long day? A bowl of ice cream.
All right. What did 10-year-old Janet dream of becoming?
10-year-old Janet was fascinated by ancient Egypt and wanted to be an archaeologist or an Egyptologist.
All right, that's very cool. What's a quote or mantra you live by?
I think I said it earlier. Life's hard. Wear a helmet.
All right, good one, good one. What's the hardest job you've ever had?
They will all have their moments. But I think being Secretary of Homeland Security is a particularly challenging position.
All right. What's the most surprising thing about being governor?
The most surprising thing about being governor? Well, one of the things is you have a full-time security detail and you don't drive because they drive you everywhere. And you get used to it after a while, but having a security detail was a new life experience for me.
Okay. Where's your favorite place to recharge?
In an opera house with live opera in front of me.
Okay. All right. What's one of the most underrated traits in public service?
Humor.
Humor?
Humor. A little levity can go a long way.
Okay, that's cool. What's one skill you wish that more leaders had in today's world?
Backbone.
Okay, interesting. If you could take a class right now at Cal, what would that class be?
I would take a class on the history of science because science keeps evolving. It underlies so much of what's happening, but it has a historical context that I would like to know more about. If you have.
All right. And last but not least, finish this sentence. Leadership is
Setting a vision, designing an implementation plan, and persuading others to follow.
Wow, what a ride. Secretary Napolitano, I want to say thank you so much for all of your time, your honesty, and all of the incredible insights you shared today. This wasn't just any conversation or interview. It was a masterclass in leadership, resilience, and courage. Before we sign off, here are 3 golden nuggets I'm taking away from our conversation. First and foremost, own your mistakes and act quickly. Face them head on, fix what you can, and communicate openly. That's true leadership. Second, perfection is unrealistic, but progress is everything. Mistakes do not define you. Your resilience and moving forward do. And third, leadership means making intentional decisions in complex situations, navigating the gray areas, and carrying the weight even when no one is watching. To everyone watching here, remember that if you don't start now, someone else will. So take this as the first step that pushes you past your doubts and own your path. Secretary Napolitano, it's been an absolute honor. I hope to talk to you again soon. Thank you.
Every story is a lesson, and every challenge is an opportunity. Success, it looks different for everyone, but growth, it's universal. Thanks for joining me here on Limitless Minds. Until next time, I want you to stay curious and remember to stay limitless. Because if you don't start now, someone else will.